I'm just admitting a few more people in through the waiting room as they're jumping on to Zoom. Thanks for joining us on this beautiful spring Sunday. Well, it is in Victoria anyway. To start with, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. Creative Clunes operates on in Central Goldfields on the lands of the Dja Dja people. I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to acknowledge any and pay respects to any Aboriginal people here today and Torres Strait Islanders.
Mine always, Richard's always comes up as numbers for some reason. I
think everybody is set to come in on mute, but if you haven't got yourself on mute, if you wouldn't mind muting, I think I can do it also from here. I'm going to pass over to our chair today, who's Maryanne Vagg. Maryanne, over to you. Thanks.
Oh, thank you so much, Ember, and welcome everybody. It is a beautiful day here in Victoria, and I would also like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. Now, today it is my absolute pleasure to introduce two wonderful people and amazing authors, and that is Anne Buist and Graeme Simsion. I've been very fortunate to have encountered both Graeme and Anne at a few author events over the years, since both of their writing careers began to flourish. I remember reading a very early copy of Graeme's debut novel, The Rosie Project, and I just knew that I had to book this author because who wrote such a fabulously quirky and original story, and that's proven to have been able to be repeated time and again with the other books in the trilogy. And I think we've all enjoyed seeing how Don and Rosie's story evolved. I was also lucky enough a few years ago to be on a panel about crime writing with Anne, and having also been a fan of her writing for a while, first the Natalie King series and her latest release, which I have to say, Anne, I think is my favourite, The Long Shadow. And it was brilliantly written and just an amazing story. But today we are here to talk about a very special joint venture, when I have a copy of the book here, which they actually embarked upon in 2017 when they co-wrote the best-selling Two Steps Forward. Now, due to popular demand, they followed up with the book, this one, Two Steps Onward, and that's what we're here to discuss today. Now, the first book was set on the Camino de Santiago, which is the 2,000-kilometre pilgrim walk from Cluny in France to Santiago in Spain. And Two Steps Onward, our intrepid travellers are tackling the less travelled, now I hope I get this right, Chemin d'Assis and the Via Francigena to Rome through rural France and Italy. Now, Graeme and Anne, for those in the audience who are perhaps not so familiar with this series, can I ask you, first of all, and you can take in turns responding, to tell us whose idea was it to write a book together, and can you tell us a little about how it came about?
Well, first of all, thank you very much, Creative Clunes, for having us. Thanks all of you who have left this fabulous day to sit inside, huddled over a computer terminal on Zoom as if you hadn't done enough of that. So welcome, thank you so much for coming along, and a bit of a shout out to the 75% who are probably going to watch this on a recorded version later on. So the idea back in
2011.
Thank you, Anne. Back in 2011, when we walked our very first serious long distance walk from Cluny in central France to Santiago de Compostela. In the first 2 weeks, now the way this is all structured is that when people think about the Camino de Santiago, they think of about an 800-kilometre walk from the French-Spanish border at Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port through to Santiago de Compostela. That's when people say, I walked the Camino, that's almost always what they're talking about. But of course, in ancient times, going back to the 9th century, people didn't just all grab a train or a plane to the same starting point. They had to walk out their doors and join at that. Most of them would come, many of them would come through that common point. So all over Europe are rivers and tributaries and little tiny streams that lead into that path. And in theory, and in practice to some degree, you can be in Budapest or somewhere like that. You can see a little scallop shell sign on a church or whatever, and you can start following those signs, and you'll go from the small track to the bigger track to the bigger track, until eventually you're on the big flood of people coming through to Santiago de Compostela. So long story short, when we started walking from Cluny, we were on a 2-week tributary that would join a bigger track in Le Puy-en-Velay. So we had 2 weeks where we saw no other pilgrim, with one exception. We were in winter too. We met this one young Belgian guy. He was 19 years old, doing it alone, and we walked quite a lot with him. And he heard our story and what we were about and so forth, and we were aspiring authors, and he said, I have an idea for you. He said, you should write together, proving he knew nothing about novel writing, because very few novels are written jointly. He said, you should write a novel together, set on this very walk. And he said it should be a love story, because he'd been very touched by us. It was very sweet, about old people. So that's where the idea came from.
Oh dear. And well, it is a beautiful love story, and I just want to congratulate you both, because it's your anniversary this weekend. So congratulations to you both. So that is indeed a real love story. It is an intriguing concept to not only share the writing of the book, but the fact that you both write a chapter each in the voices of the different characters, Martin and Zoe, which is really a very interesting way of writing the book. And Graeme, can you tell us a little bit about Martin, the character of Martin? Who was he when we first met him in 2 Steps Forward, and where is he at now, 3 years later?
Martin is a Northern British from Sheffield engineer who's just suffered a bitter divorce, where he said to his wife, take all the money, and she did. So he set out to rebuild his finances. As an engineer, he's built a cart that you drag behind you instead of using a backpack, and he's going to prove this cart by taking it on the Camino and showing the world that this cart's better than a backpack.
I love that. And the same question to you about Zoe. Who was she then, and where is she at now?
So Zoe's a Californian artist who's never really worked, but sort of always hankered to be an artist. And her husband dies very suddenly, and she sort of believes in fate and follows signs, and she gets a sign that she's going to go and see a girlfriend in France, which she consequently does, realizes that wasn't what the sign was showing. The sign was showing her she needed to walk this particular walk. So, of course, she starts walking without any preparation, in contrast to Martin, who has prepared everything down to the last detail. So it gave us a great opportunity to contrast 2 very different people who, needless to say, hate each other to begin with. But by the end of it, they've fallen in love. We weren't 100% sure we were going to write a sequel, though we certainly had one planned, or in theory. So it ends kind of nicely. You think they're going to end up together. But in this book, in the 2 Steps Onward, we find it didn't quite happen the way they thought it was going to, and 3 years have passed. And they have another chance at getting together, but this time walking with Camille, her French friend, who we meet briefly in 2 Steps Forward. So she's a good Catholic, and she has decided she's going to do a real pilgrimage for the real reasons that people did pilgrimages, her own health and for her sins. And so she's going to walk to Rome because she needs to see the Pope. And that's the other track that goes through Cluny. So in the first, of course, we had to walk the walk. In the first one, we followed the scallop shells that were dotted around. And I have one of those here that I wear around my neck. And to get to Rome, we started off in the Chemin d'Assise, and you follow the dove, which I also have a dove around the neck as well. So we followed a dove all the way to Ulla, and at Ulla we picked up the second of the walks, which is the Via Francigena, which actually starts in Canterbury and coming down, but we came across, hit it, and then took that down.
Oh, perfect. Now, there are some different characters in this second book than in the first one. although there is a couple who we do meet one briefly in the first book. Could you, either of you, just talk a little bit about some of the other characters who also take the walk with Zoe and Martin?
Well, let's do a couple each, because
yeah, perfect.
The writing challenge for us was in the first book, Two Steps Forward. They're walking a relatively popular route, two relatively popular routes, and they're going to meet people. So interesting characters are going to come in, come out, walk with them, and so forth. On this walk, like so many of these, even quite famous walks in Europe, they're not all that well frequented. You can walk for days and days, even weeks, without seeing another walker. So we needed to take the drama with us. So we added 4 people to the walk this time. So, and all of them we touch on. We meet 2 of them very briefly and 2 of them a bit more in the first book, Two Steps Forward. So we took the material we had. So one of those characters, and actually 2 characters were sort of my characters. I felt they were mine to write, and 2 were sort of Anne's to write. Even though we didn't write anything in their voices, we sort of owned those characters and loved them. So your characters were?
So, well, obviously Camille, who's the French friend, who's become ill. So she's decided she's walking to Rome, and her her estranged husband, Gilbert, the couple that she comes to accompany, and of course Martin comes with.
So I wrote Gilbert, the husband. So he's a wine buff, former wine merchant, and he sees this walk both as a chance to reconnect with his wife, his estranged wife, Camille, who he's decided to re-hook up with for the journey. So it's his chance to reconnect with her and to taste the wines and to enjoy. One of the reasons we have a character like this is there are so many reasons for doing a pilgrimage. And in the first book, we sort of showed the very organized person who was doing it almost for commercial reasons. We showed the person who was doing it for spiritual but not religious reasons. Here, we wanted the person who, like many people, was doing it for hedonistic reasons. So he says, this is a wonderful way to have a holiday. It can be a lot of work too, but that was Gilbert.
Gilbert struggles over the Alps, as did I. We watched the gradient, and after 5 days of the worst, 5 days equaling the one worst day on the first Camino, we ended them 5 in a row over the Alps. It was pretty exhausting.
Not worst, toughest.
toughest.
But so we've got, as Anne said, we've got Camille. We've got her estranged but reunited husband, Gilbert. We've got Martin's daughter. So she was, who is a presence, but not actually a physical presence in the first book, a troubled woman of 20.
Who, needless to say, perhaps isn't all that enthusiastic about going walking with a potential future stepmother. But because there's some problems with the email connections and people assuming things they shouldn't, Zoe also contacts Bernard because she thinks he needs to come on the walk, or at least needs to meet them, and he ends up coming on the walk. So Bernard,
from the first book,
who was sort of the nemesis of Martin, is there. And of course, when he sees Sarah, the daughter, he thinks, oh yeah, I'm going to go on this walk. So lots of room for conflict and some tensions.
Yes, I love that. And he was the tension between Martin and Bernard in that first book was brilliant, and I love that it keeps up in this one. It was great. Now I want to know, and like many people, I'm sure, and as you both said at the start, normally you don't write a book together. It's fairly rare that that 2 authors write books together. It happens, but fairly rare. So I guess I'm just intrigued as to how the process works. So is it a plotting and planning each stage, or are you kind of making it up as you're going along? See where the story or the character takes you? Is a little bit of both. And I'm really interested in how you get the voice right for the characters that you're writing.
Okay, well, let's talk you through this, because we've got a process now, and it's a very good process, but it took us a long time to get. So Anne will tell you how we first envisaged Two Steps Forward, the first book, because we just taken the process. Once we got to Two Steps Onward, we knew what we were doing. But when we started Two Steps Forward, we didn't. And our plan, I'll go, Anne.
We were going to write 2 completely separate books, but we planned the story. So we knew what the story was, but then we chopped off and wrote it completely separately. And forgot to mention this as a concept to our publisher, who, once we delivered the 2 books, they said basically this is the most stupid idea we've ever heard of.
The idea, it's a great idea. The idea was you could have 2 books, the entire story told by Zoe. I mean, the problem was that we've always planned our stories together, including the Rosie Project and and Anne's Natalie series and the Long Shadow and so forth. We've always planned together and we've edited together, but we write alone. We draft alone.
We can be in the same room, separate computers.
So we decided we were going to do this book. We'd planned it. We had it all sorted out. And then it was like, who gets to write it with their name on the front and get all the glory? It was all, so the idea was we'd each write the book, one in Zoe's voice, one in Martin's voice, and a couple, for example, could buy both books and have fun swapping around the different opinions and so forth. And
I like that.
we liked it too, but when we sent it up to our beta readers to check it out, we said, "Here, couple, have a look at this." They all came back to us and said, "You know what we did? We'd read a couple of chapters and then we'd swap." And we realised that the way to do this was, in fact, to do the alternating chapters. So we had the biggest cut and paste job in history to take 160,000 words of book and take out the redundant stuff, take it down to 80,000 words and make it work. But once we got there, so that's not how we write now.
When we planned this one, we planned it thinking, knowing it was going to be alternating chapters and working out who was going to best to tell which part of it. So it became fairly obvious because they have both very different opinions, and also you can end one chapter with Zoe's opinion of so Zoe thinks Bernard's a wonderful young man and thinks Sarah needs to kind of grow up, and of course Martin thinks the complete opposite, thinks Sarah and the sun shines from her, and Bernard is completely lost. So you can contrast those opinions pretty easily when you're writing, and you can do that as you switch chapters. But the geography became a real part of this novel. And if you map it out geographically, it doesn't map exactly through the sort of the timing of the novel, because it just worked better from point of view of where we were at and when the low points were and when the high points were.
So what Anne is saying is that when you're a quarter of the way through the novel, you're not necessarily a quarter of the way through the physical journey, but it's authentic in terms of the dates that we've got.
Oh, yeah. But we speed through some parts and slow down through others, and took some of the tough stuff, brought them down, and was a struggle because Gilbert loves his wine and that, but he loves it in France. And those of you who know French people, they tend to be very parochial and think everything French is best. We convinced him along the way that maybe the Italian food and wine's not so bad after all, because I adore Italian food and wine. So it was really good playing with all of that.
Yeah, and you had a question about voice, and
yes,
you've got to, if you're going to do something like have alternating chapters, you've got to make it earn its keep. You can't just do it as a little affectation and say, well, we'll have alternating chapters because it suits us because we're a couple. So you had to have the sorts of things that Anne was talking about, where they saw 2 different people, they both saw the same person in 2 entirely different ways, where one knows something that the other doesn't know, and so forth. So you're seeing these different views. But what was really the most interesting thing from a technical point of view in writing was that because most novels are written by one person, yes, they may have different protagonists, different narrators, but the voices are actually relatively close because the same person is writing it.
yes.
So people were aware at our first draft, people were aware whether Anne had written something or whether I'd written it, because the voices were too distinct. So what we actually had to do was knock off the distinctions a little bit and make it more like one person had written it. And the way that we did that, we went back and forth. So Anne would draft a Zoe chapter. I would immediately fix, and vice versa, all of us, anything that was in Martin's voice. So, and then Martin said to me, blah, blah, blah. I said, Martin wouldn't say that. Likewise with Zoe. But then overall, there was a smoothing off in the writing to make, we don't ever want, either of us, people to be thinking about us when they're reading a book. We want them to be thinking about the characters. When they get to the end, they can think, what a brilliant job they did. but we don't want to be noticed on the page.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely correct. And I would have to say I did notice that that slight difference in both the first and the second books. And I think the second book, there's some subtlety about it, but it's that you do notice exactly that they are it is more like it's been told by one person. So kudos to you both for that. Now, Anne, you touched on this just a little bit, and I want to delve a little bit further into this. So some people might suggest that the research that you undertook for these books was a little bit extreme. To physically walk these and the Alps and the whole shebang. Now, I'm really curious to know, what do you think your own experience of walking both Pilgrim Trails? I'm actually really interested in the second book as much as anything, that added to the story or the character development. And I feel like there's a lot that, particularly in that second book, that would have come out from that, from actually physically doing the walk.
Mm. So I think there was no doubt that the first long walk, the first 2,000 kilometres, was the most life-changing. Because you could then recapture that feeling of the one day at a time. And I call it a forced mindfulness, that you really do, the rest of the world kind of disappears and you're off social media, and you're not thinking it's 2,000 kilometres to go, you're thinking it's 25 till the next place.
5 till the next
or 5,
break.
yeah. If it's a tough day. And you really live in the moment. We became really much more aware of the nature around us. It was just a fabulous experience, and each long walk has been like that. What the difference with the second one was, obviously we went to a different country. Actually, I should just mention, we did the Camino de Santiago twice from Cluny, and the second time we finished on the Camino Francis, but the first time, which is what 2 Steps Forward is written on, is actually the coastal route. But we loved it so much, and we thought we needed to be able to compare it to the Camino Francis. So we finished off the Camino Francis and just loved it. It was a very different experience, much more people, very, very social. But we thought it was wonderful. I had my sort of spiritual moment in the first one, where it was way more lonesome and solitude and thinking time. We had lots of thinking time on this walk. Because there really wasn't anyone else. We really met very, very few people. Obviously, there were people we were staying at. In the little places we stayed, we'd meet them. But mostly, certainly around the mountains, didn't speak English, and Graeme speaks French, but my French is pretty ordinary.
In 1,600 kilometres, we met 5 other walkers, 2 pairs and a single.
That's extraordinary.
Yeah, and most of them weren't going all the way. They were only doing a 2-week stint, as the Europeans tend to do, and then come back and start from where they finished the following year. But the geography really spoke to us with this one, and I'm going to think what was Liguria, which is where Zoe sort of has her down moments. It was very difficult walking the Alps. We got through those, but then Liguria was really remote, in a way that I'd never really thought of Italy being remote before. And there were kind of ghost towns. There were these old hotels, huge old hotels, that was basically all closed down apart from a tiny little section where the family now ran it. And back in the 50s, it's where the Italians used to go on holiday.
Oh, in the 70s.
Or the 70s maybe, yeah, but not anymore. So a real sense of I guess, falling apart and decay, which kind of really fitted into the feeling of where we needed to be at that moment in the story. And we had some fabulous moments, some of which go into the story. The one in the Italian works, the name of the town. We were absolutely drenched, freezing cold. And Scalafera, yeah. Sliding down. We still had an amazingly good walk and still really enjoyed it, but everything that happens to our heroes and heroines in this book happened to us pretty much. And we put a different spin on it, but it started to really speak to us. I guess the other thing was the religion on this one. Neither of us are religious, but it was very spiritual for me, and you can't avoid religion. Because on all of these long walks, there's churches everywhere. You're stopping by churches. There's Madonnas. There's crucifixes. And because Camille was doing it for
Oh,
religious
that's all it is.
reasons, we kind of took on a bit more of the religion and visited lots of churches and some amazing churches.
Yeah, I think, and touched on an interesting thing here, that when you are doing it with a clear intent of writing a book, then from time to time you are going to try to see what you're doing through the eyes of your characters.
Yes.
A staunch religion, firm Catholic who is doing this for salvation to some degree, and it was interesting to wear those glasses, if you like, from time to time, and put yourself, honestly, as much as you could in that space.
And I saw a question come up there in the chat, where did we stay? Well, on the Camino de Santiago, particularly the Camino Francis, it's so well set up with hostels. You can stay pretty much at hostels all the way. The Chemin de Assis, not so much so. Once you hit the Via Francigena, you can stay in hostels, and there's some wonderful
But not every
hostels.
night.
But not every night, not unless you're prepared to do longer distances than sometimes we were. But on the Chemin de Assis, we tended to stay at hotels, occasional cabins in caravan parks, and we carried a very light sleeping bag, but we weren't camping. So we had very light packs, and we needed somewhere with blankets. So it was mostly small hotels, and mostly by ourselves, because though part of it we did in nice weather and that. We still,
and of course,
no walkers though.
Of course, you go through Tuscany and you go through Piedmont region in Italy, which are well touristed, particularly Tuscany. So we were going to real tourist towns in some of those places where all the accommodation was standard tourist accommodation, and would serve like a welcoming aperitif after he has dumped his pack and had a shower.
We did a range of places, from the hostel right through to quite nice hotels.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is very much reflected in the what you've touched on there. I found as a reader of the second book, I think the first book there was a light-hearted there was some laugh out loud moments in both books, but I felt like the first one was maybe, that they were learning about themselves and learning on the walk. I felt like the second one, there was a transformative quality of the walk. So for example, Martin and Zoe had done the walk before, they knew what they were doing, as had Bernard. So I felt like there was a lot more, and by the sounds of it, you had the same experiences yourselves, that transformative quality and that reflective time, because there was fewer people on the walk. Can you talk a little bit more about the kind of, the kind of atmosphere of some of those ghost towns, because that comes out as there's a real poignancy in the book on those, and just the transformation then of those towns that clearly once upon a time were bustling tourist resorts, but are now no one's in, very few people are visiting.
Well, the capital of the Ligurian region is Genoa. And people would come out of Genoa in the past and up into the Apennine Mountains behind there, and it was where they would take their holidays. And they built big roads for this and so on. But now, like people all over the world, they travel to other countries, they travel overseas, and so on. And there's been that sort of falling away. And there's a very practical implication for walkers, in that we struggled sometimes to find accommodation. We always managed to find somewhere to stay, but it won't take much more before you won't be able to do those walks unless you're doing the full tent and primer stove and so forth, which is a pretty big deal.
Yeah, yeah.
We walked down a highway, well, what was once a highway, never saw a car on it, and it reminded me, it was great bridges across cavernous sort of valleys, huge bridges with rusted rails. Yeah. It was quite extraordinary.
It was quite post-apocalyptic feeling. It was quite, I mean, definitely we're in Italy. We're in a major economy, but we're in some of the more remote places. And I think one of the attractive things about these long distance walks is that they do take you into places that you might not stay. You might drive through them, but it's far less likely you'd stay if you had the option of driving another 100 kilometres and stopping. Because, I mean, Genoa, which is the capital there, this is where the
Oh, it's Cinque Terre.
Cinque Terre.
Yeah.
Cinque Terre, very famous tourist destination, full of restaurants, all of those sorts of things.
We went walking there at the end of our walk. We had to go back to France, so we ended up doing some time in Cinque Terre, which was gorgeous.
And we're
But
pretty
that's
much
actually-
line of sight. You can just
Yeah.
about see it.
You could almost see it, but it was actually quite south of us. It was about probably 25 k's south. We were up in the mountains, and the Cinque Terre is right on the coast. So we never went through Genoa. You don't go through big town. I mean, we went through medium-sized towns, I guess, in Italy, like Lucca, Siena, what other?
San Gimignano.
San Gimignano. Oh, that's still little.
Yeah.
Mostly they were little. Lucca's a bit bigger, and Siena were probably the two bigger ones we went through, which were lovely.
Yeah, and that. I think that was some of the contrast to the first book as well. Was you almost got an even deeper dive into the really kind of that feeling of remoteness and isolation. And I guess that kind of, speaking of post-apocalyptic, you actually wrote the pulling together of the book, shall I say, and happened during last year's long lockdown, as opposed to this year's long lockdown. And I felt like some of the descriptions of the towns almost had a wistful quality about them. And I wondered whether that was your pandemic experience, sort of looking fondly back on the ability to travel. And I guess I'm interested in how the pandemic experience perhaps impacted the way that this book came together in the end, or did it?
I don't know that it did.
Well, I guess I would say we got back, we got to Rome, and we got back on the 4th of March of last year. So just as everything was happening, and they were being very, in Italy, of course, where it was,
Up in Lombardia,
we didn't go, we'd gone close to it, but, Rome hadn't really sort of switched into that being a problem and so forth. But we got a plane home via Dubai, and it was when we got off in Dubai and everybody's in
hazmat.
Yeah.
It was like, oh my God, what's happened?
Yeah.
So it came home to us. Look, I think when you write a book, there's a lot of stuff that goes into a book that is subconscious. You don't realize that you're writing it. And I think that mood must have infected what we wrote, because we came back into lockdown. And it's a little like when we wrote Two Steps Forward, we envisaged it as a romantic comedy. Now, there is still a romantic comedy subplot in it, but at the end of the day, it's about midlife transformation. And
Absolutely.
The themes, I think most authors will say this, the themes that emerge in a book emerge. If you actually go to try to put those themes in, if you say, I'm trying to make a point, then you will make that point over everybody's head. Whereas, we found that was an emergent sort of theme. And I think the theme about chances, we actually thought that we'd be writing about love at different stages of life, because we had the couple who, one of whom's facing death, the very young couple with the whole world in front of them. We've got Zoe and Martin. But we really ended up writing about chances, about whether you seize them, whether you let them go, what does it mean? What does it mean to be older, particularly about aging? And I think that was on our minds. What does it mean to be older and to start saying, that's not going to be possible for me anymore? It's too late to do this. And at one point in the book, Martin's daughter sort of virtually shakes him and says, you're going to keep telling me to, look at you've been waiting all your life.
Yeah, absolutely.
One of the beautiful things about walking is you can do it until you're really very elderly. And we've met people on our walks that have done like 2,000 kilometre walks. In fact, we met someone that did the whole Via Francigena from Canterbury with 2 replaced hips. So, and we've met people in their 80s doing the Camino Francis. So it's, you can, as long as you can walk a few kilometres, you can, in the Camino Francis, there's lots of accommodations, so you don't have to do more than maybe 10 Ks at the most. A little harder to do this one. I wouldn't rush off to do this one unless you're quite fit over those Alps. They were hard work.
In both of the books, there's some real characters, and I wouldn't say large and laugh, because I recognise there are people who are very much like, I think Gilbert in the second one was just about my favourite. He was wonderful. He had such a love of life, and the descriptions of his meals were actually making me really hungry throughout the throughout the book. It was wonderful. Now this is one. I know that you didn't meet as many people on the second walk, but for the second book. But is it tempting, or have you been tempted to base characters on real life characters, real life people? And have you had people think they recognise themselves?
Absolutely. Well, forget tempted. We do it. And we do not create characters out of thin air. We create characters out of our experience, which means that they come from people that we know, including ourselves. I mean, but they are a little bit of this person, a little bit of that person. At some stage, Maryanne Vagg is going to be in one of our novels, but just
awesome.
such a small part, and we won't name you. Actually, Joanna Cannon has got a novel coming out which has me named in it, because I said I'd make a donation to some cause,
Oh, fantastic.
So, but we there's a little bit of this person, a little bit of that person, and yes, we have had people think they recognise themselves in our novels, and it's never been a good thing, particularly, and they've always been wrong.
We always went, what?
How do you see it? We lost a friendship. We lost a friendship over this.
No, wow.
Yeah, long-standing friendship. And the character actually had the name of the person, as in the Christian name. I thought, if I was going to take this person and put them in the Rosie Project, as it was, then by golly, I would have called them something else.
Something else. Amazing, isn't it?
We've spent a lot of time in France, and we've both met several people like Gilbert.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it's very easy to create.
He was wonderful. He was wonderful. And I think, as you both touched on, the character development in this second book, I really loved that thoughtfulness about the way the characters, they were deeper, perhaps more reflective in the way they approach the second book, and there was that reflection on the stages of life, and I absolutely agree that the themes of opportunity came out. So I feel like, there were some conflict and there was some tension throughout the novel. Some expected and some came out of the blue for me. I was reading going, I didn't expect that would happen, but which is great. So just talk a little bit about how those necessary, because it happens in real life, the necessary conflicts drive the narrative for this kind of a novel, which is, it was a very thoughtful novel in a lot of ways.
I think I've just finished writing a book. It's gone to the final edits and proofing, called The Novel Project, which is about how to write a novel. So I done a lot of reflection on some of these sorts of things. And one of the techniques that you can use to introduce conflict for an individual and around them is to say, what does this person want most in life? What are the two things they want most in life? Now make them choose.
Yeah.
And Zoe is very much a central character because she has this long-standing friendship with Camino. And one of the themes in the book, you want to say, Anne, about?
Yeah, it was unexpected. Camille was sort of a gift to us because she'd featured in the first novel, so it gave us an excuse to bring her back. And again, she was inspired by people we've met. And
Friendship.
But what it ended up being was a lot about their friendship. And we hadn't realised how much that was going to be a theme. And look, it was probably also fed in from, I have 3 very close girlfriends, 2 of whom I've known since I was 8, and the other ones since I had kids, and the 4 of us now. In fact, we've been to France together. And as we're aging and going to I've been to their parents' funerals, and it's starting to kind of really reflect on some of the themes that come out in this book. But the friendship has been an extraordinarily important one, and I think a lot of my female friends would really resonate with them, that female friendships and what happens to them over time.
I'm glad Anne said she's been friends with these girls since she was 8. Now, so a lot of people have got friendships which have lasted far longer than the most important romantic relationship in their life. We've been together 32, we married 32 years, but That's Anne's known these friends, but for longer again. So we know that Zoe is, comes to the story with an interest in perhaps rekindling this relationship with Martin. What if she has to choose ultimately between Martin, the lover, as it were, and this long-standing friend? So, and then we interrogated the friendship and so on. So it was an interesting, but look, conflict. Sid Field, who's the guru, the past guru of sort of screenwriting, sort of famously said, without conflict you have no drama, without drama you have no story, or words to that effect. And conflict is the essence of drama. You've got, it doesn't have to be, guns at 20 paces or anything like that. It can even be internal conflict, as Zoe has. But there have got to be some people bouncing off each other and having some wanting different things and getting in each other's way. And you don't want it to be painful to read. You want to feel still you want to be part of that group, but it's natural if you want some drama for there to be some people wanting different things.
And Bernard and Sarah were there right from the start to kind of drive some of that tension. And the tension with Camille comes out at the end. And as I said, a bit unexpectedly, even though we plan, that actually happened in the first draft. It was separate from the planning. So we ended up changing some of the, so even planners can do pantsers at times.
I think that's really, and I would imagine that's actually, that experience is enhanced even with two of you writing together, because that's, there's always going to be a little bit of an element of unexpectedness in that as well, which is
in both the first and the second book. A crucial moment was when one of us rewrote a chapter that the other person was the other person's chapter. Who felt they were standing from the outside and said, they're not seeing what's should be in front of them. Let me write this chapter and tell them. And just that one chapter written by the other person in each book, I think made a big difference to the emotional heart. And neither book was the true emotional heart of the story present in the plan. It grew out of it.
It's fascinating, isn't it? And I loved when the characters kind of take it in an unexpected direction, surprising even the authors. That's wonderful. I'll just touch on a couple of, I guess, just one more technical question, and then I've got a couple of questions, one more question after that, and then I'd love you to do a reading. So I just want to talk briefly about the editing process, because we do hear that a little bit. And Graeme, look at you. That's great that you've got that book coming out. I'm sure that'll be is it going to be out in time for Christmas?
No. I'm hoping I'll have a physical copy in my hand by Christmas, but 1st of March is the publication.
Oh, well, we'll note that down for sure. So just in terms of the editing, I guess, is it slightly different when you're doing your books together than when you're doing your own books, or is it a similar process?
Yeah, look, I guess I'll do the technical question, because I'm the technical guy in the relationship, and Anne's intuitive. So there's rewriting and there's editing. So rewriting is what you do yourself, and we tend to think editing is what happens when the publisher's editor gets involved. So the rewriting, it's not that different. We do review each other's books, make comments and all those sorts of things. So, but we do it with these books chapter by chapter. So Anne will have written a chapter, we'll chuck it over to me and I'll have a look at it, partly not just to offer my thoughts on it, but also so that I know when I write the next Martin chapter, I'll know where it's going. Although at one stage, Anne got way ahead of me, and it was writing these every second chapter. I think, oh boy, I'm not going to have any room to move here. but it all worked out well. And then Anne has an editor and I have an editor. They're different people. And my editor,
it is.
No, but sorry. For Anne's crime books, crime books like The Long Shadow and so forth, Mandy Brett is her editor at Text, and David Winter, the legendary David Winter, is, so Mandy Brett does Helen Garner. She's a very, very serious editor. And David Winter does me.
But he did this book too, so but my chapters as well.
But David does us both. He does the joint books. And he is, we have the thing I say about editors is you've got to get over the idea that they're a hurdle to get past. That's so much a school attitude, or even a profession. Some people in professional working have to get past the auditor, as it were, rather than both Anne and I have worked in professions where peer review was crucial to doing well and to your own growth. And once you see the editor is having the same interest in mind as you do, they want a great book out there, you realise just how helpful they can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever had a time when you've argued back and won?
Always win. In the US, it's different.
Yes.
In Australia, it's editors make suggestions, and once they've accepted the book, now it's different. If they say, we can't accept this book because it's 300,000 words and it's going to be under 80,000 words or whatever, resubmit, then they're in charge. But the moment they've accepted the book, everything is a suggestion. And it's part of it, we're structure freaks, so we have very little pushback on structure. So then it gets down to lines. And very, very seldom that we'd say no. And when we do, David, we think the right word is X, and Dave will say, yep, I understand, that's good with me. So it's a pretty good constructive process. And you had a different question that wasn't technical for Anne, otherwise I ran out of time. Sorry.
No, it was actually it's actually for both of you, but it was really about your first book each, and did publishing that first book change anything for you?
Anne?
Oh, I'm trying to think which is the first. You look, you'd have to count my first one that I wrote not under my name, because that really was my first, and it started me on a journey of learning. As Graeme did a course.
Sorry, explain.
Oh, sorry. I wrote a romantic erotica, but it was also had a lot of story in it. There was always kidnappings and murders and all sorts of things, but they were very, very sexually explicit, as per that particular publishing company, what they wanted. But I'd done a few minor courses, but really in the process of the next 10 novels I wrote for them, I was learning. I was learning about structure and how to tell a story properly. So that Medea's Curse, which was my first under my name,
Yes.
had all of that experience into it. And so, yeah, learned a lot through that process.
Yeah, for my first novel, it wasn't the publication, it was being shortlisted for the Premier's Literary Award for an unpublished manuscript, which went on to win. But there was the shortlisting was the big moment for me, because that was the moment that said, oh, wow, you could write. And then the next big moment with the Rosie Project was when the Germans, I got a publication advance from Text, and it was equal to 3 days of my income from my, so it wasn't going to change the world, but then that changed with the Germans buying foreign rights, and then others following in their wake. And at that point, one day the numbers were such, and that didn't take long, that I was able to say, I'm a full-time writer now, that's my job. And I was able to give up that. So it was huge in terms of life change. Yeah,
absolutely. Now I'd love to hand it over to you both to do a little reading, if that's okay.
Well, and as Don Tillman would say, well, obviously we're going to do a reading, we do it from the start. Make no sense otherwise. So
we've slightly edited it down a bit, and yeah, just do a couple of minutes.
So anything that seems a bit awkward is because we edited it down. Good.
Fate announced itself as the buzzing in my pocket of my jeans. The guy running the team building workshop for the refugee centre where I volunteered was checking off the cliches. Altruism without empathy is like a ship without a rudder. A journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step. That one I'd lived. But since when did helping people get so complicated? My mind was on the homework he'd set. Be prepared to discuss 3 events that have defined your life. I could only think of 2. The first was at college. I helped my roommate, Camille, get a termination. The second was the death of my husband, Keith, in a car accident. I searched for answers, and healing led me first to Camille's house in Cluny in eastern France, and then to a single step that turned into a 1,200-mile walk along the Camino de Santiago de Compostela, the ancient pilgrim's path from Camille's door. But 3 years later, here I was in a hotel meeting room, surrounded by negative energy, while outside the sun caught the white caps across San Francisco's harbour. I took out my phone, an email from some guy called Gilbert Morvan with a .fr address. Were scammers now posing as Frenchmen? Then I remembered he was Camille's ex-husband. I typed in my PIN and fate showed its face. Camille will make a pilgrimage on the Chemin d'Assise to Rome to see the Pope. What the hell? Gilbert was Camille's ex. They'd split up just after I finished the Camino. And the Pope? Camille was Catholic, but when we were roommates in college, the most piousness I'd seen was a quick visit to the priest for a confession so she could sin some more. Plus, the Chemin d'Assise is a walking track. There are only 2 long-distance trails that go through Cluny. The other is the Camino de Santiago. Camille had watched me pack for that walk, freaking out at the idea of living for 3 months without makeup. No way was she walking to Rome. I was right, but in the worst way. Camille has multiple sclerosis. She is unable to travel without assistance. We are reunited. We will depart Friday. So don't try and talk me out of it. Friday was 3 days away, and it seemed she was making her pilgrimage for the most traditional reasons, the hope of a cure. My neighbour nudged me. The facilitator was looking right at me and my phone. It's not enough to talk the talk. I stood up and headed to the door. Everything okay? The facilitator asked. I'm walking the walk.
So I'll give you a little bit of quick continuity here. So Zoe emails Martin and says, I'm going to do this walk. Looks like Camille can't walk anymore. You've got this cart that you worked into a gurney. Maybe you could bring that along and drag her along, etc., etc. My response to Zoe's email hadn't required any great weighing of options. I was already committed to Sarah, who was coming down from Edinburgh to spend the second half of her university holiday with me in Sheffield. Zoe's request and invitation had arrived as I was shutting down my computer for the night. Now I couldn't sleep. I reread it and seized on the practical. The engineering school in Cluny, where I designed my cart, an example of the final model, had arranged for the British Army to ship it for display. I sent an email asking to borrow it, and another to Zoe's friend Gilbert to get his address. Now I was free to tie myself in knots contemplating what I'd have done if I wasn't responsible for a 20-year-old who under normal circumstances would be studying, partying, or working her own Camino instead of trying to fix a relationship with her father. 3 years earlier, the answer had been clear. Clear enough that I flew to San Francisco to invite Zoe to do exactly what she was now proposing to me. I'd come home confident that even if she didn't agree to the walk, we'd find a way to get together. Then she'd pulled the plug. I was pretty unhappy, to be honest, as I eventually was with the therapist I ended up engaging, devastated. And now she'd apparently decided she wanted to see me again. I was the one saying no. Some sort of karma. The next morning, there was a text from Sarah, thinking about not coming down, guessing that will be okay with you. Neither of us liked phone calls, but some of those were the only way. What's changed? Nothing. I just don't want to be stuck in the flat in Sheffield. You could have stayed with your mother. I would have, but she's gone away and won't let me stop there. Which is a bit ridiculous considering I've been living away from home for 2 years. Regardless, we made an agreement. I've been looking forward to having time with you. What are we going to do? All day in Sheffield? Not exactly Paris. I was supposed to be the rock in the stormy ocean. Reliable, consistent, there. Trouble was, Sarah's emotional instability was paired with a keen intellect, which she devoted largely to playing games. We'd been playing Rock and Ocean for 20 minutes when frustration got the better of me. Look, I knocked back a chance to go walking in France. With Zoe? Bloody hell. Why would I be walking with Zoe? So yes then. So no. I said no to her, okay? Not okay. I'm not going to be the one who wrecks your holiday with your girlfriend so we can sit in a flat all day doing nothing. I thought you had a study to do. Anyway, if you don't come, I still won't go to France. I'm not coming, so you'd be staying home for no reason. I imagined myself explaining to my therapist that if Sarah had definitely pulled out, I might as well go to France. I suspected he wouldn't find the logic as compelling as I did. Less than an hour later, Sarah texted again. Sorry for being rude. Things aren't great. How about I come to France with you? Everybody wins. Why would you want to come to France? Hello? France versus Sheffield? I sat on it all afternoon, and the more I thought about it, the more sense it made. Camino de Santiago had changed me, as it reputedly changes everyone. Perhaps a walk would be the circuit breaker Sarah needed. She and I would certainly have time together. And if Zoe was going to be back in my life, it wouldn't be such a bad thing that Sarah got to know her. So that's essentially a recap and a setup.
Takes me back. It's such a wonderful book. Now we have got some time for some audience questions. I'll see if we can see hands up or type something in the text if anybody had any questions.
That's easy.
I can ask a couple more. Of course, I've got more questions. So you've just returned from a little while ago from extended travel around Australia, and will we see Zoe and Martin visiting us in Australia at some time to perhaps walk the Aussie Camino, which goes from Portland to Penola?
Probably not, is the truth. Probably not. Portland to Penola is not a big walk, okay? not long enough for a novel, I don't think. We had been planning to walk the 88 Buddhist Temples Trail in Shikoku, Japan.
Yeah, but COVID kind of got in the way twice. We may still do it, but whether that turns into a book or not, I'm not sure. I think we'll do the walk regardless. Yeah.
So we kicked around ideas that we might do with Zoe and Martin in Japan.
Oh, that would be amazing. We did have a question from Adrian. Did you continue on to Finisterre to burn your boots?
We didn't burn the boots. We put them in the bin in Santiago de Compostela. So we didn't actually go to Finisterre. If we do it again, which I suspect we may well, we will go on to Finisterre. That was my decision from...
It's only 3 days.
Yes.
It's 3 days. Because Santiago is so much the formal finish that, you know, it felt like an anticlimax to us. So we decided that Santiago de Compostela would be the place. And it's a moment that there's a character in the books, Monsieur Chevalier, who's sort of the Yoda character who's the guru and so on. And he's based on a real person. And that person said to us, you know, 3 predictions. You know, 1, you'll get blisters. 2, the Camino will change you. And 3, when you get to Santiago, to the cathedral, you'll cry. And look,
I did.
Yeah, it is a real moment to walk for that long and to arrive at the destination. I guess if we felt everything else, we just want to sit down, chow down and drink.
The first time I cried when I arrived, that was just so emotional. And the second time I cried, the first time we didn't go into the welcoming ceremony, or the religious ceremony. For whatever reasons, we didn't do it the first time. But the second time I did and watched the bonfiniere with the incense and that's when I cried the second time. And that was, yeah, it was really very moving. So the third time it'll be Finisterre.
Well, were there any more audience questions at all? Otherwise, we're just about out of time, I think. No?
Might be one in the chat, or is that was that Adrian?
That was the where did you stay overnight, which was a little bit earlier. But Anne and Graeme, can I thank you both so sincerely for this afternoon? It is always a pleasure to speak to you both, both individually for your amazing books and also together. If you're stuck, everybody, for Christmas presents, you could just do a double pack for people, because they're really worth. I actually had them both at my parents' house not too long ago, and my mum devoured both of them, and she said to me, "When's another one coming? I really like those books." I said maybe when COVID lifts and Anne and Graeme can travel again. I think the Japan one might be the Sarah Bernard story, perhaps. Who knows?
Yeah, we're
Let me just say, in answer to an unasked question, you can read 2 Steps Onward without reading 2 Steps Forward, but I can't see any good reason to do it.
Correct. Absolutely.
Read this first. If you don't like it, you won't like the second one either. If you do like it, you'll probably like the second one. So if you're thinking of Christmas presents and that, it's all the same to us. We get $1 less commission on this one, I think. But seriously, read in that order. And can we just butt in and say, thank you, Maryanne. It's always a much tougher job to do what you're doing than to just sit here and answer the questions about something we're passionate about. So thank you hugely again. And thank you very much, Creative Clunes, for having us.
Yes.
Thank you, Creative
Thank
Clunes.
you. And thank you for those who kept away from the sunshine for an hour to join us.
Well, thanks to daylight saving, we can all go out and have a wander in the sun again. But thank you both so much. And thank you to our audience for joining us this afternoon. It's been a real pleasure.
To see you all there in a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you.